First of all, with meningitis, it is so painful. The headaches are unbelievable. Your neck gets stiff, and it actually felt like somebody had my eyes in a vice and they were squeezing them, because meningitis is an inflammation of the layer between the brain and the skull. So when it becomes inflamed, it can't expand outward because of the skull, so it pushes in and crushes your brain and puts the pressure on your eyes. And after spending a night in one hospital, and they're thinking I'm having sinus headaches, I disconnected my IV and with my wife's help, made it to the car, went to another hospital, and got out of the car in a wheelchair. They put me on a table, had me hug my knees, and they're giving me a spinal tap, and all of a sudden, I'm gone.
Thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, I'm very excited to hear about what happened with your NDE. If you're willing to share it, I would be love to hear it. And like you said, it may have been a while ago, but I'm sure it doesn't change. It's almost like it's something that happened yesterday.
My NDE was from meningitis in November of 1988, and at the time I was a CPA, which is the same as a chartered accountant in Europe, and a tax law professor at a major university, and had my own firm. And I was the typical type A workaholic, own it or control it. And as a result of my near-death experience, it totally changed my perception of reality, my personality, totally changed me. But what was different about my NDE from most people is when I left my body, first of all, with meningitis, it is so painful. The headaches are unbelievable. Your neck gets stiff, and it actually felt like somebody had my eyes in a vice and they were squeezing them, because meningitis is an inflammation of the layer between the brain and the skull. So when it becomes inflamed, it can't expand outward because of the skull, so it pushes in and crushes your brain and puts the pressure on your eyes. And after spending a night in one hospital, and they're thinking I'm having sinus headaches, I disconnected my IV and with my wife's help, made it to the car, went to another hospital, and got out of the car in a wheelchair. They put me on a table, had me hug my knees, and they're giving me a spinal tap, and all of a sudden, I'm gone. Now, the big difference between my NDE and others is when I crossed over into what I call the lower level of heaven. I call it the recycling level because it's really where souls go between lives. But there are many, many layers above that. And when I arrived in the lower level, it was like I popped up in a campfire or a fire after going through the tunnel that goes through the layer of darkness. And there were 4 golden egg-shaped beings. For some reason, for me, they don't take on human form. I just perceive the soul in kind of an oval, a giant oval, golden, radiant being. And I turned to them and I asked for help. But instead of help for what, I don't know, but I asked for help. But instead of answering my questions or saying anything, they leaned back and went into prayer, and it shot me up to a higher level of heaven where the light was so bright and the love was so strong that I can't even imagine anything close to that. What most people talk about in heaven at the lower level, the bliss, is a fraction of what's at the higher level. I define God, as a result of all my experiences, I define God as any level of consciousness that exists above the level I'm at. So if I'm in the next level, to me, God is the layer above that, or wherever I'm at. And a lot of that definition is for humility purposes, because I don't ever want to say it's the layer that I'm on.
Yeah.
Anyway, I ask for help at this higher level. And all of a sudden, this voice, and it's like an epiphany. You don't hear, you just know. But it's so strong, and it said, it is time. And I came back into my body, and all of a sudden, my perception of reality changed. Now, keep in mind, left brain, logical, scientific, all of a sudden, I started perceiving people's thoughts as physical objects.
Wow.
This surprised me. It's like, and as I would walk toward them, I would know their life history. If you've ever heard a person say they had the life review when they died, all that is their conscious awareness is no longer restricted to the physical body, and it expands outward in the soul through all of the life's memories that are stored in reverse sequence, all the way back to conception memories, which are about around 15 feet from the physical body. These stored memories in people's souls became physical to me. And I can't believe what I'm perceiving because it's not logical. So I started experimenting with it. One of the first things I did was I took hypnosis classes because I wanted to understand how hypnosis worked. I ended up returning to the classroom and got a degree in psychology, and then went on to study neuroscience because I wanted to understand hard science behind what I was experiencing and why my perception of reality was different than the people around me. And it took a few years, but I managed primarily thanks to Duke University, between the grand rounds in psychiatry and the Duke Institute of Brain Sciences, I was able to decipher all of this. But one of the surprises came to me in 2001 when I was getting my psych degree, and I'm in the research lab, and I'm hooked to an EEG, which measures brainwave frequencies. And I was unfamiliar with them, and this was just playing with it, per se. And I decided, as I'm looking at the screen, while I'm wearing this headgear with all the probes on my brain, I decided to meditate, just to go into a trance. And all of a sudden, it flatlined. Now, keep in mind, it's an EEG, not an EKG. So, but I'm like, how can this be? I'm looking really carefully at it, but it wasn't really flatlined. If you looked at it carefully, it was like a hacksaw, real small, jagged line. Two professors came over and they look at this, something's wrong with this machine. So I switched to another computer, put the gear on, same exact thing. And that's because neither they nor I had heard or understood of the gamma frequency of consciousness. The gamma frequency of consciousness it's a higher level that you attain. It's the frequency of consciousness of the mystics. And you can't achieve it, though, until you first reach wholeness in your own soul at the lower level, which means merging all the masculine and feminine together. And then you can transcend self. Well, transcending self is where you begin to perceive directly with your consciousness external to your physical body instead of your five senses. So what happened to me, it's just like being born in the womb. And all of a sudden you have eyes and ears and you have a whole new reality. What is it? So it took me quite a while to learn what I was seeing, what I was hearing, what I was smelling. And in the interim, you can't help but think you're nuts. You know, for example, I would smell smoke and nobody else would smell smoke, only to find out later that I was in a building that had burnt many years before and 2 firemen were killed there. And whenever these 2 firemen would come near me, I would smell smoke, which then led to the secondary thing of starting to see spirits that had left their physical body but stayed in the earthly realm and had not crossed over. Some good, but for the most part misguided. And a lot of what I did for years was helping souls that had left the body, that were stuck in this realm, many as ghosts, many of which had attached to other people, to cross over to the next realm. When you cross over, between the earthly realm and the lower heavenly realm, there's this layer of darkness. The Tibetans call it the Bardo, the Egyptian Book of the Dead talks about it. That layer of darkness acts as an etheric fence. And what it does is when a soul enters that, they will perceive gargoyles and misshapen beings, and whatever they fear will manifest in that darkness. As a result, their fear is amplified, and their fear causes them to sink back down to the earthly realm, and they can't cross over. Where to someone who truly looks to the higher level, when they talk about the tunnel that they perceive when they die, that's actually just an opening or a portal through that layer of darkness, and the light at the end of the tunnel is merely the light of heaven shining down through it. So what happened to me as a result of going to that higher level of heaven, and the love was so strong, and love truly is the answer to everything. And the reason is that love binds your masculine and feminine aspects of your soul together and stabilizes them within you. So that without love, you're like a wet blanket in the washing machine on the spin cycle, and you wobble and you can't reach the higher frequencies of consciousness. Now, some people in relationships will embrace someone else, and the love between couples and 2 people actually merges into one to raise them to the higher level of consciousness. What happened with me was, it was all within me, and it brought these levels so close together that I'm in both levels of consciousness, or many levels of consciousness at the same time. So the Dalai Lama, for example, sent 10 of his monks to the University of Wisconsin, where they did EEGs. The Dalai Lama's EEGs had very high amplitude, very high frequency. They were gamma frequency. The reason is they meditated for 30 years and raised to a higher level of consciousness, so they could think of it as each layer is a higher voltage, but they had not merged their masculine and feminine together. They relied on the higher energy of higher consciousness, so their amplitude was very high. The amplitude on an EEG is actually measuring the what's called the action potential firing rate of the neurons in the brain. So it's just like one of those old computers from back in the early 80s, where you press a key and you wait for it to respond, and it's so slow. Well, that's what happens when your consciousness is restricted to the physical body. But when you raise your consciousness outside the physical body, because you're not tied to the dense physical body, the processing speed goes so high that you will pick up on things as epiphanies, and it's so simple. And later on, when you're back down at the earthly level, it's like, why can't I comprehend what was just so simple? It's because when you're in the physical body, not only your processing speed is lower, but your capacity, the amount of information. Think of a merry-go-round. If you stand in the middle of a 10-foot merry-go-round, it's a very small circumference that your body's spinning. But if you've expanded your consciousness out to the outer perimeter of that merry-go-round, it's flying, and the distance that it's traveling is much greater. So you have increased capacity and increased processing speed. And that's one of the main attributes of transcendence. Now, I didn't meditate. I was not a religious person. This was not something I prayed for. This was something that, zap, you're dead, now I'm giving you these abilities and sending you back, in spite of me, not because of me. So what happened with this, I was attending a program where a guy was using dowsing rods. And I thought, wow, this is neat. I want to try this. And he would have someone stand across the room and imagine an object, and then he'd take the dowsing rods and walk over and show them this is exactly where that object is at. So I tried it. It's like, this is easy. And I'm explaining this to someone, and I said, let me go to my car and get my dowsing rods. Ends up they weren't in the car. I came back in and I'm explaining this to them as though I had the dowsing rods in my hand. And all of a sudden I realized I don't need the dowsing rods. I can feel these thoughts with my hand.
Wow.
But it went a step further. If a person closes their eyes and I walk back and touch the memory because they're attached to it, I can be 15, 20 feet away and it moves their physical body, often knocking them off their feet because they're attached to the thought that they imagine. So what I did is, if you're familiar with depth psychology is where you keep going deeper and deeper into your past to hopefully find the perceptual programming event that set the unhealthy pattern of behavior in action. Well, I found that if I merely stick my hand up and walk toward a person as they're thinking of whatever their issue is, when my hand hits the stored memory in their soul, it pushes them backwards, as though I'm physically pushing their body. So because I'm starting at conception, it's pretty easy for me to tell what the mother thought of the father while the child, who is now an adult that I'm working with, was in the mother's womb. So wow. if the mother got angry when she was pregnant, that pattern is still in the child, carried in their soul many, many years later. So what happens if you were to look at the human soul, forgive my inaccurate circle.
It means you're not mad.
And this is the physical body right here, and we'll put a nose on it. This goes out in all directions about 15 feet, or about 30 feet in diameter. Your childhood memories and conception are on the outer perimeter. So when a person dies and they had a life review, all that's happening is their conscious awareness, no longer restricted to the physical body, goes right through these memories. So what I started doing with it was, I had a woman come to me and she said, I'm going into Duke University Hospital in 3 days to have double knee replacement surgery. Can you help me? I said, I have no idea. Let's find out. I said, close your eyes and think of your knees. Now, this woman was, I'm guessing she was in her early to mid 60s and healthy. And except for both of her knees were swollen like footballs. And I said, close your eyes and think of your knees. I walk back, I'm out here, I stick my hand up, start walking toward her. I said, what happened involving your knees when you were 17 years old? That's where the trauma is at. It's attached to your knees. She said, well, I was a senior in high school when I was 17. He said, I was in a bike accident, but it wasn't that bad. I got a couple stitches in my one knee. I said, no, this was really traumatic, emotionally devastating. Because when I reach into the stored memory, I actually feel the emotional content of it. Here's what happens. If I'll use two different colors here. When I reach into a person's soul and I feel a stored memory, it's stored at the intersection of the two aspects of consciousness, this being the masculine, which spins to the left, this being the feminine, which spins to the right. Both of these are anchored back into the brain and to the entire nervous system in the physical body. So emotional people would retrieve their memories using this aspect of consciousness, which is the creative, artistic, women are from Venus attributes, while the masculine aspect spins this way. So a masculine consciousness. Now, you notice I talk about masculine and feminine consciousness and not actual gender.
Yeah.
Because we're all both. And we all must develop both. And right now, because of the time we're in, souls are growing so fast that these are very fluid as people are growing toward wholeness. The entire gender identity debate, discussion, everything, which I don't judge it, it's actually a good thing because it means souls are growing. It's merely a function of which aspect of consciousness is dominant in their soul. I do a lot of work in the gay and lesbian community. Never to judge people or to say, something's wrong with you, but to understand specifically, for example, what event took place that caused their consciousness to shift into that pattern. And sometimes it's not an event, sometimes it's just a normal development. For example, in working with lesbians, I've noticed that probably over 90%, when I touch these memories in the outer perimeter when they were in their mother's womb, their body physically moves to the right, which tells me their mother was angry at their father when they were pregnant with the daughter in their womb. Now, my goal is merely to help people to remove obstacles to love that exists in their soul. So if somebody has an obstacle to love in here, I define sin as any obstacle to love in the soul. And I actually feel them as I'm walking through a person's soul. So if I take a hold of that and I physically pull it, even though the person is standing there with their eyes closed, they'll come forward like I have a rope tied to them because they don't want to let go of it. And many times I'll say to them, would you like to forgive this person who did this to you? And when they say yes, and I say, would you like to forgive yourself too? And they say yes, it's like a rope breaks and their body flies backwards as they detach and let go. Because I can't pull that out of their soul if they're holding on to it. Yeah. But as soon as they forgive that person, they're free. And usually they say, wow, I feel so much lighter. It's because this obstacle stopped the two aspects of consciousness from combining together. While I found a lot of the understanding of what I was experiencing in the Bible, I'm just as much Buddhist as I am Christian, and just as much Hindu as I am Buddhist. And I would probably say the same about Muslim, except I'm not as educated or aware of their scriptures. But in the Sufi aspect, totally agree. So this was a whole new reality for me as a result of my near-death experiences. What that led me to, back to the woman with her knee,
Yes.
she said, I got some stitches in my knee. It wasn't that bad. I said, no, this was very traumatic. She thought for a minute. She said, while I was in the hospital, this is back in the early 70s when drug use was very common, especially in the high schools. My boyfriend was in a drug rehab program. And when he heard that I was in the hospital, he walked away from it and came to the hospital to see me. And they wouldn't allow him in the hospital. And he went and overdosed and died. So and she goes into shock, and the emotional trauma of her boyfriend overdosing and dying was locked in her knees for 40 years, which, imagine if I'm gouging my finger into your arm like this and it hurts. Other than smacking me a good shot, if you want to block me, you'll tighten the muscles up so I can't penetrate it. We do the same thing with our physical body, especially along the spine, in order to block these emotional traumas that are stored out here in the soul from reverse bridging back into the physical body. This is what I found causes a lot of illness. So once I realized this, we went through a simple forgiveness process that took about 5 minutes. And all of a sudden, she's so relaxed. But after all that time of the tendons and the muscles being so tight, trying to block it, both of her knee joints were shot and both needed to be replaced. In other words, we did not reverse the damage. We merely took away what caused the damage. Mm-hmm. She goes in for her double knee replacement, comes out, and a lot of this I didn't find out until about a year later. The doctor said, you're the only one that I've ever had that sat on the edge of the table with both legs dropped down at a 90-degree, because usually people are stiff-legged after the surgery. And at 3 weeks, she was going up and down my stairs unassisted. At 3 months, she was scuba diving in the Caribbean and took up ballroom dancing. By removing the trauma that caused the defense mechanism, that meant the muscles were more flexible, so when she went in for surgery, they didn't have to force and strain and create more trauma. And at the same time, because the muscles were so relaxed, the blood circulation and the revascularization accelerated the healing so much. And even though she had the knee replacement, it was back to normal for her. So I use that as one example of how traumas in our soul. Now, I'm going to share one with you that it baffles me. And I was working with a man who was in his early 70s who had Asperger's, severe Asperger's. Now, which is, again, a milder form of autism, but he had it pretty severe. And ordinarily, I don't allow spouses or other people in the room as I'm doing a session, because we are bringing up confidential memories that I don't want them to be vulnerable. So yeah. I don't want their deepest dark secret to all of a sudden pop up and their spouse is right there and they're worried about what the spouse thinks or their girlfriend. So ordinarily I do it just with the person. But anyway, he wanted his wife to sit in on it, and she did. And I'm back in these early memories. And I identified, when I touched these memories, his body came forward like I had a rope tied to him, which told me he had abandonment issues with his mother. And I'm like, how can you possibly have abandonment issues with your mother when you're in her womb? So I'm thinking, well, maybe she had a miscarriage and couldn't bond with the child, or maybe she lost another child. He said, no. He said, while she was pregnant with me, her father committed suicide.
Okay.
The trauma that the mother experienced, the emotional trauma, actually affected her bond, which what I found was critical was during the 3rd month of pregnancy, during the neural tube development. And specifically, it's where the thalamus in the brain, which does the priority sort, this is tied to pretty much to the amygdala, or this is tied to the hippocampus. The thalamus in the brain connects those two and is the priority sort of all information coming into the brain. So what I found was that when a person has a trauma during the 3rd month of pregnancy, that it affects the thalamus's ability to process emotional consciousness.
Oh.
And because I feel masculine or feminine, I can tell where this person is at. Here's what blew me away. I take a hold of that memory, which when I have a hold of it is pulling him forward. And we go through forgiveness work. Would you like to forgive your mother? Would you like to forgive yourself? Now, one character trait of Asperger's or autism is if they look straight at you, their comprehension is very low. But if they turn their head to the left and look at you through the right side of their right eye, their comprehension is very high. And the reason is the way the optic nerves are wired, that if you're looking out of the right side of your right eye, that hits the inside on the back of the eye. That portion of the optic nerve crosses over to the left hemisphere and only gives input to the logical aspect of consciousness. But if you hold it here, it's giving input to both hemispheres, and then result is the thalamus shuts down, comprehension is low. And I had noticed early on in the session that he was turning his head to the side and looking at me out of the right side of his right eye. And after we did the work, his wife said, look at him. He's no longer turning his head to the side to look at you.
Wow.
Your soul is who you are. It's permanent. When you come into the physical body, your soul manifests your physical body. Like I said, your soul's 30 feet across. A lot of times when women are pregnant, I'll know it before they do.
Wow.
Because when they're standing near me, the love, that soul that just came down, is so pure and radiating so much love, it's like a fire hose of love coming out of them. And I'll feel that, and I'll know they're pregnant, because I'll know that a soul, in order to radiate that much love, had to have just come out of the next layer of consciousness.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is really not about my near-death experience, but it's what I learned as a result of the near-death experience. So over the years, I've done a lot of hospice work, helping people to die, because I can help them cross over. A lot of people misunderstand ghosts, and they think, oh, they're all bad, or if it's attached to you, it's a demon, it's bad. And I point out to them that in their own Bible, Jesus referred to 2 different categories, one as demons, which were evil, and the other as unclean spirits. The unclean spirits are just like you and I, ended up having obstacles of love that block them from crossing over. So what I found is that I could work with them remove these, even though they had no physical bodies, and help them cross over. So a lot of what I do, for example, a woman had bone cancer, really a lot of excruciating pain. And I'm walking into her room, and I'm walking through her memories as I'm going through the doorway. And I knew that she had one brother that she had fought with her entire life and never got along with. And I said, how old were you when your brother was born? He said, about a year and a half. I said, no wonder you hate your brother. Your brother took your mother's love and affection away from you. He said, oh, it was worse than that. My mother couldn't care for both of us, and she sent me to my grandmother's, and my grandmother raised me and kept my brother.
Wow.
I said, that's not your brother's fault. We went through forgiveness and forgiving her brother, and for 70 years she had been angry at her brother. And we were able to do that within a few hours of when she died. The funny part of it was, as she's dying, she yells to get me into the room right away. And I walk in, and she's leaned over like this with both arms up in the air, and she says, Lee, take a hold of my hands and pull me out of my body. And I just started laughing, and I said, that's not how it's done. I said, lay back and close your eyes. Now, closing eyes is really, really important, because most of your input, over 90% of your input into your brain at any point in time, comes through the optic nerve. That's your number one attachment in Buddhism. That attaches you to this reality. So if you're watching a movie on TV and you want to switch to another movie, before you can watch the new movie. Closing your eyes when you pray or meditate is what detaches you from this reality, which then allows you to shift your consciousness to a higher level. And once you learn how to shift it, it's unlimited. I don't think there is a ceiling on how high you can go. Now, there's one other concept that's really important, and that is soul development. I use what I refer to as a W, as the roadmap for soul growth. I'm just going to pull this one down. So when we're born, we're in dependency. We rely on our parents to feed us, shelter us, protect us. As we grow, that dependency decreases. Right here, about the age of 8 or 9, roughly third grade, when they start long division and multiplication, a child switches from the emotional child, and they start to go into the logical aspect of consciousness. This is what, along with validation, is what helps develop the sense of self or self-identity. This being right here, teenage transition. Now, what I've noticed is when the soul is developing, early on, from conception through this, a child is in the delta frequency. Delta is very, very slow brain waves. As they start to approach this, they go into the theta frequency, which is a little bit faster in brainwave processing. When this happens, that's where the emotional subconscious programming takes place. Once they turn the corner right here and through validation, now the logic develops, and this is the ego identity. Now, so many people think of the ego as bad. Not at all. Because if you don't formulate an ego, you can't grow spiritually. Because this is a stepping stone to get over here. this is where you take your authority and your will away from everyone else and all the codependencies and dependencies, and you say, I'm in control, I own my will. Because if you don't own your will, you don't have the authority to surrender it to a higher level of consciousness within you.
Yeah, true.
Especially if someone else is holding on to it, the only way you can raise your will up there is to raise theirs up too. And that's why attachment causes suffering, because it holds us back. What happens then is over here is the transcendent self. Now, what transcendence means, death is not graduation in this life. Death is merely a semester break. On that other diagram where I showed the conception memories, if I take a half step backwards, I'm in the memory of the death experience of their last life. As I walk out further, just like growth rings on a tree, all the memories of their previous life are right there in reverse sequence till I reach the next conception memory. I go through that, boom, I'm in the death experience. So all of your soul's life experiences are with you all the time. I have to be careful explaining this to some people because it tends to ruffle their feathers a little bit, but it's reality.
Exactly.
See, that's why I had a hard time with this. It's like, just like Edgar Cayce, I had to reconcile what I was directly perceiving with what I learned as a child in my religious teaching. And I don't have time to go into that today, but that was a long process of reconciling those two without discounting, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So what happens is right here, is the dark night of the soul experience. As you're coming out of a strong ego identity, you hit the midlife crisis, all of a sudden the ego says, wait a minute, if I were in control, bad things wouldn't happen. But bad things are happening, so I must not be in control. Thus, the ego starts to be painful. Now, depression can either be back here, where you are attached to someone else and they're pulling away, or depression can be as your individual identity is being diminished and you're attached to who you are. Either one of these will cause depression if you're focused behind you instead of ahead of you. A friend of mine was a high school teacher, and she had taught elementary school and then took off 18 years to raise her two daughters. She went back to teaching and took a job in the high school, and they gave her the 5 classes, the worst of the worst students. One of the other teachers quit, just couldn't take it. She was ready to quit, and I said, let me come in one day and teach all 5 of your classes. Because these students were 9th and 10th grade, rebellious, wouldn't listen. And I came in and I said, I'm here to help you to understand yourself. And I said, I'd like a volunteer. I said, I'd like somebody big, a football player. I said, I want you to come up to the front of the room, and we're going to do a little demonstration. And I said, we're going to get into a shoving contest. I want you to shove me, and I'm going to shove you. Nothing too rigorous, but we're going to use this as an example. And we're doing it gently, and it starts getting a little bit rougher, but not much. What he doesn't realize is I'm manipulating him so that the teacher's desk, which has been cleared off, is right behind him. And when his legs are almost against the teacher's desk, I give him a good shove and he falls over backwards onto the desk. And I help him up and I explain that if you are going through life rebelling against the people that you are attached to, it's like crossing a river in a rowboat. Which way are you seated in a rowboat? You're seated backwards. You're looking at the shore you're trying to leave. And as a result, you can't see the rocks or the brush or the debris or the rapids, and you run into every single obstacle in that river or in life because you're not looking where you're going. I said, this is why your goals as individuals are so important. I don't care if it's sports, I don't care if it's graduation, I don't care if it's a career identity, whatever it is, you need a career down the road. Because now you're going to cross that river by looking at the far shore. Well, if you're in a canoe or kayak and you're going forward, you're going to see the obstacles and you're going to steer around them, and you're not going to have the difficult experiences in life because you're focused on where you're going. That same thing is true in helping them through this, as it is people without some sort of an understanding of transcendence, whether they do it through religion or understanding, if they don't have a goal ahead of them, they're going to keep circling back. And there's 4 options when a person's going through midlife crisis. The first is people circle back. What can I do to feel good about me and revalidate myself? The affairs, the sports car, the new job. What can I do to feel good about me? Which all it is circling back. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference, a symposium at the Duke Institute of Brain Sciences, and it was on the neuroscience of psychotherapy. And they had a presenter come in and present the entire morning. And it just happened that I was having lunch with, I believe, Stephen Porges, who he's the founder of polyvagal theory and the stomach, the second brain, and all of that. And he said, well, what do you think of the presentation this morning? And I said, I could have done the same thing as her therapy by sending the guy to a prostitute, and it would have been cheaper and faster. And he started laughing, and he said, what do you mean? I said, if you listen and you watch to the films, all she's doing is validating him and making him feel good about himself. She's not helping him to grow forward. She's taking him backwards. So we have to be careful that we don't just circle people back, which is actually what a lot of the drugs do, the pharmaceuticals. Yeah. The second option, some people just give up and die, just whether it's through illness. I have found that every autoimmune disorder has an origin in the soul. Some event caused a shift in consciousness. This same thing is true of cutters and self-mutilators. Generally, those traumas happen around the age of 2 or 3. When I discovered this, I was working with a woman, and I said, wow, what happened involving both your mother and father when you were 3 years old that you have been carrying so much guilt since that time? She said, when I was 3 years old, I was swinging my father's golf club, and it connected with my 5-year-old brother's head and knocked him out. My parents came running in. You've killed your brother. How could you do this? How could you do this to him? Memories are stored based upon the perception at the time of the event. It doesn't matter that your logical brain knows, oh, I only knocked him out and he only had a headache and he was fine. The emotional trauma is still stored because, and this is why cognitive therapy does not work. Yeah. Because you cannot logically fix an emotional trauma. At best, you can circle around it. But you must own the emotion, and then you have the authority to change it. There's a saying, if you don't own your complexes own you.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what I do is I help people to find the origin of their complex. Sometimes I end up going outside of the current life, and the origins are, especially phobias, are. I was working with a woman, and when I work with them, I prefer to know nothing, not even their names, no history, nothing, because I don't want my mind to interfere with what my soul is perceiving. And I'm standing in her past life, and I said, this is really weird. I'm standing in your death experience. I can't breathe. My body is feeling like I'm being crushed. I said, I feel like I'm drowning. She said, that explains my phobia of water my entire life. She said, I was born in the Azores off the coast of Portugal, and she said, I had to move out of there. I could not live around that much water.
Wow.
Go back, we remove it, boom. So it's important that people do their own work, but many times they just need help to find it. Because what happens is, once you go through this shift and you're using your logical consciousness, a lot of times you develop emotional amnesia for anything that was a trauma. I found, for example, that OCD, imagine that there's a minefield and you want to walk through that minefield. You know that if you only step in the footprints of the person that walked through before you, you're not going to step on a mine and get exploded and killed. Well, think of those mines as emotional traumas. As long as I stay rigid and only repeat the exact pattern as before, I'm not going to risk stepping in an emotional mine and have it explode on me. So what I'm explaining is a whole paradigm that this awakening, I'm nobody special. Anybody can do what I do. But what it takes is for them to grow to this higher level. Incidentally, the third option, as you're diminishing self, the third option is, because the closer you get to the dark night of the soul, the scarier it is. Think of, in Buddhism, this is the no self. Or in Christianity, this is the dying daily. This is where I have no identity. Who am I? What's my goal in life? And you truly feel like you're lost. It is so scary that people approaching it will, instead of going forward through it, they will revert back to a dependency relationship. It doesn't matter that they were business executives with a big ego. When they hit this right here, fear becomes so great that they surrender to another person. This is what is happening in society on a grand scale right now. This is why, for example, everyone out of fear swallowed all of the vaccine, this is what you have to do, without questioning authority. They let go of discernment. This happened to me. I do a workshop on relationships because in working with souls, I found that many things, everything affects relationships. So what happened was, when I was the type A own it or control it masculine, my wife was the emotional feminine counterbalance to me. So think of a teeter-totter. However far you are out on your side of the teeter-totter, they must go out to the opposite end to counterbalance you. So what happens is, in normal soul growth, you both grow towards the center. where both of you can stand in the center and you don't need each other to balance anymore, but yet you enjoy being with the person. So you continue the relationship as two individuals loving each other, walking a common path together. That's the ideal relationship. Well, what happened to me when I died and I came back this emotional basket case? Now, why did I come back the emotional basket case? Because I had a trauma that I was unaware of that happened between the ages of 3 and 4 years old. During that time, I abandoned my emotions and shifted into my logical consciousness. I was truly the proverbial 7-year-old going on 35. You develop a premature sense of self. It's a toughness that protects you from emotional pain. To give you an idea how I grew up in a very poor family in a remote area. I mean, we truly had an outhouse as I was growing up and carried water from a spring. Even though we had running water, it wasn't enough to flow into the house from the spring. When I was 15 years old, I bought my first apartment building because I had this sense of self that realized if I make money, that money is power and that's my freedom. Well, when I went through my near-death experience, all of a sudden my consciousness went back. And because I had developed my logical consciousness to up here and my emotional feminine was down here, I couldn't straddle the fence and be in both at the same time. So I had to let go of this. There I was, top of my profession, CPA, tax law professor, handling tax court cases and IRS audits, and I totally lost the use of my logic. I couldn't even sit at my kitchen table and do a simple tax return after a near-death experience. I truly was like a 4-year-old who could cry at the drop of a pin because I had to go back and embrace my consciousness at the level that I had abandoned it when I had my trauma. Because you can't become whole. Back to the teeter-totter. If I was all that way out here on the logical and she was out here on the feminine, after my near-death experience, I'm over here on the same side as her. Well, what happens on a teeter-totter if you have two people sitting on the same side? I'm falling and there is no bottom. I am going so deep into despair that I'm sure that I am going to die. It was the darkest experience. So I leave my marriage because I love them and my two children, my wife and my two children, but I don't want to drag them through what I'm going through. And a year later, I meet another woman who, ironically, I refer to as the drill sergeant from hell because she was just like I was before I shifted, because now she was what I needed to balance my consciousness in this relationship. My consciousness and my emotional consciousness grew up, and I gradually moved towards the center and was able to re-embrace my logical. Once I got the two close together, she left me. She said, "You're Teflon coated when it comes to guilt." In other words, once you become whole within yourself, you cannot be manipulated by other people.
Yeah.
Because you can be with them, but you don't have an attachment to them. So I go through this example of explaining what happens to the soul. The magic question, and if people only remember one thing from this entire podcast, the magic question that will set you free and will accelerate the learning process is, what lesson did my soul need to learn that I brought this person or this experience into my life? Once you understand what the lesson was, pretty much learned it, and now you no longer need the difficult experience. That will set you free for the next difficult learning experience. But I use these as life is just the school for the soul to grow. We're planted here in these seed pod bodies in the darkness of the earth so that we can sprout and grow and realize we're not these physical bodies, we're souls. And that's what transcendence is. Transcendence is graduation. You will keep reincarnating over and over again until you learn to transcend self. In order to transcend self, you must start off with your emotional, develop your logical, and then, and in EEG studies, they have shown that during this dark night of the soul experience, the theta, which is the early childhood experiences right here, actually synchronizes with the the beta frequency, which is the high logical. This is prefrontal cortex. The human prefrontal cortex generally does not fully develop until about age 25. This is why you don't have people becoming enlightened or having profound transcendent experiences usually until after the age of 30, because they have to reach here and develop both aspects of consciousness before they can combine them. So the end result of all this is that, let me back up one comment. I explained the attraction of when two individuals seek their complement in order to feel whole by using another soul as a crutch to raise to a higher level. What happens is there's a primary attraction that even takes precedence over that. We are attracted towards individuals. This is what I call the first law of attraction. And I came about this as a result of I touch memories in people's souls, and I'd feel the love, and I'd see them coming forward. I'd move in a little bit further, and all of a sudden they'd go backwards, and I'd realize, oh, that's how long that relationship lasted, because I'm walking through the timeline of their life. And then I would say, oh, here's the repeat of that same pattern in the next relationship. Here's the repeat of that pattern. The number one attraction in relationships, the number one law of attraction, and it's not that God is sadistic. God wants us to have opportunities to cleanse the obstacles to love from our souls. To give us that opportunity, we are attracted toward individuals whose personality is similar to someone with whom we have unresolved conflict.
Yeah.
So I had a woman come to me and she said, I don't know what's wrong with me. She said, it's like I'm addicted to my husband. She said, he has beaten me 4 times that I've been hospitalized. 4 times he's gone to jail. In 2 weeks, he's getting out of jail and I'm taking him back again. Why? What's wrong with me? And I said, close your eyes and think of your husband. I walked back, and as I get in, I said, what happened involving your mother that was very violent when you were 3 years old? She said, my father came home drunk and beat up my mother. I said, and you loved your father? Yes. And your mother left him as a result of this, and he was no longer in your life? Yes. And you missed him? Yes. And you wanted to fix your father so that this never would happen? Yes. You're using your husband as a surrogate for your father to try to resolve this. We go back to stored memory in her soul from when, because these are physical objects, when she's 3 years old and this trauma is there, and we do forgiveness work. She forgives her father, she forgives her mother for leaving him, but understood under the circumstances. But most importantly, always forgive yourself. That is always, always needed. The Next day, she called me up and she said, I don't know what's going on. She said, I no longer have any desire to be with my husband. The attraction's gone. I said, you don't need a surrogate to resolve a problem that's already resolved.
Yeah.
So that's the other relationship aspect. It's all soul dynamics. So I had a woman come to me with breast cancer. And I said, close your eyes and think of where the cancer is at in your breast. And I walk in, and as I'm reading the memories in her soul, I said, you blamed yourself for everything as it relates to men. I said, you blame yourself. You carry the burden for everything. And I moved in a little bit, and all of a sudden I hit a memory where she was very angry. And I said, your husband cheated on you, and you became very angry at him. And I moved in, I saw the abandonment issue, and I said, as a result of you getting angry at him, he left you. And then you beat yourself up for getting angry at him, which was a justified emotion, but because the consequences were he left you, you're blaming yourself for getting angry. That's what's attached to your cancer. I walk back in her soul, and I see the same pattern again in a different relationship. And her response, that's when I had cancer, breast cancer the last time.
Wow.
When I touch a memory that is affected, is attached to something that causes cancer, a person's physical body always goes to their left, 100% of the time, no exceptions. And what it tells me is that they've internalized their emotions and they're beating themselves up. So I was working with a woman who was an Army vet who had severe PTSD and was on disability. And she comes to me, and I walk in and I touch the memory, and she didn't tell me anything ahead of time, but I could feel it based upon where the pain was at in my body as I'm standing in the memory. And I said, why are you blaming yourself for being raped? You're a victim. And she looked at me, and I said, when I touch the memory, I said, it's like x-rays to bones. This is not woo, woo, woo. This is, if you internalize the emotion and I touch the memory, your body moves that direction. There is no different explanation. And she said, I was a rape counselor helping other women, and it was a date rape, and I didn't report it or do anything about it. And I got drunk, which is how it happened. And yes, I blamed myself. She cried for about 24 hours, and trauma's gone as she released all those emotions, because she was intellectually blaming her perpetrator while she was emotionally blaming herself. So it's important to know what the underlying emotion is. What happens is, now you can see why I did a presentation in 2002 when I was a professor, and another professor said, I have some friends in Washington, D.C. that would like to have you present and explain what you do. So I go down, and I'm in an office in the Naval Intelligence Building right outside. It's actually across the Potomac in Arlington. And there's top military and top CIA people there, and it's in one of these high-tech where the TVs pop out of the conference room table. And I did an all-day presentation. And in the morning, it was all theory. And then I said, after lunch, I said, I want you to go out into one of the offices, bring someone in. I said, preferably female. Why preferably female? And this is really, really important. If I hold this object up and I say to you, focus on this object. Now close your eyes and still focus on this object. Go ahead and do it. And now close your eyes and still imagine that object. And go ahead and do this. Close your eyes and still imagine this object that you're visualizing it. And if I move that to the side and back in again, During the period that your eyes are closed, you won't be able to visualize it because you're following what I'm saying logically. If I say to you, I want you to visualize the face of someone that you have unresolved conflict with on this box, and now close your eyes, and I move the box, even though you're standing many feet away with your eyes closed, your physical body will move whichever direction I move the box. The feminine emotional aspect of consciousness locks onto the memory itself, where the logical aspect of consciousness only locks onto the space the memory is in. This is really important. What I just said, if they understood this in learning disabilities, they would solve a lot of the learning disabilities in autism and in children. Because if you have a child who has shifted prematurely into a logical aspect of consciousness, the stimulus of teaching emotionally the way they do in early elementary school, they're not going to comprehend anything. You must match the stimulus with consciousness. I explain this, and it's critically important. It goes back to the hologram. It is the men are from Mars. They do not feel. Their memory works like me saying to you when you were a senior in high school in science class. It's like pulling a file drawer out, pulling the folder out, opening it up, you're there. The logical memory retrieval. Where an emotional memory retrieval will feel and go directly to the memory. It's why emotional bridging works so well in therapy. Now, the reason I had to explain this is the reason that I normally, not always, but I'll say I prefer a female volunteer because for demonstration purposes, their bodies will move and other people can observe it. Where the same memory, I can reach into it and feel it, but a guy who is not in touch with his feelings, I don't feel anything. This happened one time when I was working with a woman with MS, and it was so profound that she was a doctor. She went and got her husband and brought him back the next day and said, do a session with him. And I'm walking through his field and I'm touching his memories. He is pure logic. Did not move at all. And I said, traumas are here. I said, for example, when you were 18 years old, there was a severe trauma and it's stored here and it's affecting you. You're just so much in your logical aspect of consciousness that you're not embracing your emotions. Well, he lost it. He said, I was 18 years old when my mother committed suicide. Oh. So I use this as to why the emotional aspect of consciousness is so critically important. Both are equally important. But we have to be careful to not use our logic to escape emotional trauma, which is what so many people do. So I profiled this woman's life who came in front of the group. And I said, for example, when you were in college, you were in a relationship. He was a lot more into you than you were into him. And I said, you had a hard time getting out of that relationship. But you did. And I said, about 9 months ago, you met a man and you fell madly in love and you are still madly in love with that man. And she goes, I'm moving in with him this weekend. And once they saw that, it's like, wow. We saw her body move as he touched the memory, and he told us what the memory was that he was touching. It scared them so much. They said, people aren't ready for this yet. People need to think their thoughts are private. People can't think that their thoughts are public. What I realized was the people that were sitting in that room needed people to think that their thoughts were private. Right. But my message in meditation, in the early 90s, I had all these visions that were showing me the future and what was unfolding. And I saw the turmoil that was created during the COVID, where people became very emotional and irrational out of fear on a large scale worldwide. And this puzzled me. And I was shown the unfolding of the turmoil that is happening, and we are about to experience great turmoil. I mean, beyond imagination turmoil. From a lower level, we can say, oh, how horrible. Oh, how painful. From a higher level, we can say, oh, how wonderful, because the egos are getting crushed and souls are going to start growing, just as what happened to me in my near-death experience.
Yeah.
A near-death experience is an instantaneous ego diminishing. You're
Yeah.
dead. Your ego's gone. And so in order for the enlightenment shift to take place worldwide, we have to go through. Well, I thought what was going to unfold was going to happen in the mid 90s, like 94, 95, because I was shown things involving China. And at that time, they were just opening up with China and all the manufacturing jobs and everything was shifting over. And I was shown that the turmoil in our country would come out of China. And it didn't make any sense because they were a third world country at the time. But what happens is, back to frequencies of consciousness, higher you go, time collapses. Time is not a function of the speed of light. Time is a function of your frequency of consciousness divided by the speed of light. So if you are able to raise your consciousness to a higher level faster than the speed of light, time collapses, and that's how people have the ability to see into the future. The problem is, once you come back down into your earthly consciousness, there's such a time distortion that you think it's going to happen tomorrow, and here we are over 30 years later, and the stuff that I thought was going to happen immediately, it's just now happening. So when Jesus said, love God, all he was saying was, strive to raise your consciousness to the highest level possible. When he said, love your neighbor as yourself, well, some people don't love themselves, so they have a difficult time with their neighbors. I actually prefer the phrase that the Sufi poet Rumi used, which is, life is about finding and removing the obstacles to love that exist within you. That's my paraphrase, or actually Rumi's paraphrase, the second commandment. So if you look at Buddhism, Buddhism's no self or non-attachment is really the same as the Christian dying daily or dying of self. They are both teaching exactly the same thing. I was, back in the early 90s, I spent a week with Thich Nhat Hanh. And there was a United Methodist minister that was in my Sangha. And at the end of the week, he made a profound statement. It was like a baseball bat to the side of my head. He said, after all my years at the pulpit teaching Christianity, I can honestly say that I've never really understood it until now when I'm looking at it from a Buddhist perspective. Like, light bulb, by combining the two, it's better than either one individually.
Yeah, I agree.
So what I call what I shared with you, the science of the soul, because it really is science. It's not woo-woo. To me, it's stimulus, response, repeatable. Other people say it's not science because I can't do it. And I said, yes, you can. You have to raise your consciousness to do it. So, it's just like Jesus said in John 14, the things that I do and even more you too shall do. So I am nobody special. Anybody who awakens, there's a parable where Buddha's students came to him and said, are you a healer? And he said, no. Are you a master? No. Are you a teacher? No. And after a long list and frustrated, the students said, what are you? And Buddha replied, awake. That's the goal.
Absolutely.
So the fourth option right here is to go through the dark night of the soul and come out the other side and transcend self. But there's a problem. When a person goes through that experience, they immediately have this period of euphoria and love and bliss. And it's like, I'm somebody special. God's given me a mission. Anytime you come through a transition stage in life, let's go back here. When you come through the teenage transition, right in here is what I call the hire the 16-year-old while they still know it all phase.
Yeah.
They have merely put their toe on the threshold of a sense of self-identity, but there is so much euphoria as a result of coming out of this turmoil that they think they've made it. The same thing is true right here. And what ends up happening is people develop a spiritual ego and bring it back and develop a spiritual ego self-identity, and they'll keep repeating the dark night of the soul over and over and over again and wonder why. So I don't know where we're at time-wise, but I've kind of given a summary, a very quick summary. One other experience that I'd like to share, and I had mentioned in the early 90s, I learned hypnosis. Well, every one of my sessions were the bizarre and unusual. People would go so deep that, I mean, people would pop into past lives, and I didn't believe in past lives. And I'd merely say, go back in time to when you felt this feeling the first time, and boom, you're in a past life. And so I'm working with this woman, and she was in her late 30s, and she was an emergency room nurse in a local hospital. And she had severe pain in her left shoulder and her left arm to the point where she was going on disability and couldn't work anymore. And she had gone through all the medical tests and everything, and because she worked at the hospital, and the doctor said, the only thing we can figure is that it's arthritis because there's no other cause. It's idiopathic. I'm working with her, and she goes into a trance, and this is like session number 2 that I've ever done in my life. And all I said to her was, if that pain in your shoulder could speak, what would it say? And a male voice answered me out of her mouth and said, get out of here. I'm like, who said that? This guy tells me his name. I said, what are you doing here? He said, I was killed in a car accident on Route 15 in South Williamsport on the corner in front of McDonald's. This is in Pennsylvania. And I followed my body in the ambulance into the hospital where I saw her in distress, and I moved in.
Wow.
Now, totally outside of my belief system. I don't even believe in ghosts at this point in time. This guy tells me not only his name, his wife's name, his children's name, his phone number, his address. I am truly speaking to this guy using her body. So I said to this man, what caused your physical death? He said, I was thrown out of the car and it rolled on me. I said, what part of your body? He said, the left side of my body. All of a sudden, I realized that his memory, the trauma and the pain of his accident was manifesting after 2 years of being attached to her. His pain was manifesting in her, and she couldn't figure out what it was. That is the very first time that I realized memories aren't stored in the brain. Your brain is more a transmitter and a receiver between your consciousness, which is really big. I said to him, why are you in her? He said, I love her. I said, if you loved her, why would you cause her this pain? I didn't know I was causing her pain, but you know it now. Yes. You realize you're going to have to leave. Yes. I said, would you like to apologize to her for the pain that you've caused her before you leave? And he says yes, and he starts apologizing. He finishes his apology. I turn to her and say, would you accept his apology? And she says yes, and all of a sudden her left arm flies up in the air. Her hand opened up, it came down limp. Her pain was gone. So was he.
Oh, wow.
That that experience was such an eye-opener for me. It was a total paradigm shift in my belief system, because this guy was a soul. He was just stuck. This happens to a lot of people who go through accidents, that their accidents cause their death. And, I don't judge anyone. I especially do not judge evil, because it is the love that and caring that I radiate toward them that, number one, protects me from them. Because if they're evil, putting a dense object in the high frequency of divine consciousness, it's like putting a dense object in a microwave. It heats up and catches on fire. So they are afraid of what is flowing through me. It's not me. In fact, if I'm full of and this actually happened, I was working with this spirit, and she called herself Bathsheba, to this woman. And as I'm working with her, and she just started laughing at me and laughing. This goes on, and this is deep, guttural laughing. And I'm thinking to myself, I've never had one of these not go well. I've never failed at this. What's going on? And I turned around and I throw my hands up in the air and I say, God, I give up. Well, that's exactly what I needed to do, because I was in the way. Once I said, I give up, and my ego was out of it, they could flow through me. And all of a sudden I turned around and I said to her, you're just using that laughter to hide your fear. I hear the fear in your laughter. Dead silence. Within 5 minutes, boom, she's gone. So the key is to always radiate love, not our own love, a higher consciousness. All this stuff is really so simple once it becomes physical to you. If you have any background in chemistry, you realize that in the first orbital around the nucleus, there's 2 electrons that travel in counter-rotating patterns. Guess what? Back to my diagram of the human soul. It's the same thing. So that masculine goes one direction, feminine goes the other. Niels Bohr, the Danish atomic physicist who's considered the father of atomic physics, discovered that when an electron goes from a higher orbital to a lower level, it gives off a photon or light. That's why, for example, by splitting the uranium atoms, it gives off all this heat that they use for nuclear energy. Consciousness works the same way. As you go to higher levels of consciousness, love is greater, and so is the light, and so is the intrinsic energy at that level. And this is why you have to be really careful. Because once you start to tap into those higher levels, your thoughts physically manifest. And if you allow yourself to get angry at someone, you could kill them.
Yeah.
So there is a responsibility that goes with the growth. And, I often said, I'm a screw up. All this happens in spite of me, not because of me. One thing I realized is God tends to pick his biggest screw ups for his most important work. Moses had murdered an Egyptian. He argued with God, you got the wrong guy. And God said, nope, you're going to lead my people out of Egypt. Or Saul, persecuting and killing Christians. He's there at the stoning of Sanhedrin. And after his road to Damascus event, when he becomes Paul, he becomes the greatest evangelist in Christianity. Or Peter cuts off the slave's ear, denies Jesus, you're going to be the father of the church. Bottom line is, it doesn't matter how bad we have screwed up. I joke about the parable of the vineyard workers. It doesn't matter if you start at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. The pay at the end of the day is the same. That's what forgiveness can do. During the last hour of the day, by doing your forgiveness work, you can be at the same place of somebody that worked their entire life. That's why I call the parable of the vineyard workers the procrastination parable, because you can wait till the last minute. I don't recommend it, but you can. So we are about to come into a period of great despair. And it's necessary for the same reason that during the Vietnam War, there was a phrase, there are no atheists in foxholes. You know,
Yeah.
when that shell might hit you in the head next and you have no control over it, your ego doesn't say, I'm in control. And that's when people turn and surrender to a higher level of consciousness. The problem that I encounter is people's preconceived notions of God block them from experiencing it themselves. And hopefully with just this introduction, so recently I got the go-ahead and I am booked to do a program in Syracuse, New York next month. And then I'm going to start traveling and not just the United States, but Europe as well, and doing workshops and presenting, because after 35 years, I realized that people weren't ready for the understanding that I'm sharing until they are entering despair. Because if you gave them the information ahead of time, they would have discounted it and said it doesn't work. So the timing is right. And I've not met anyone. I can't wait until everybody experiences what I'm experiencing so that they can say, oh, this is why Lee said that. Because it's not a matter of theory or faith, it's a matter of seeing and knowing and experiencing it. So just because I'm able to do these things doesn't mean that I don't have my own garbage coming up. So I recently had lung cancer. And October 28th, just a few months ago, I had half of my left lung removed. And I knew it was going to happen. And I got stung. You know, when you're doing exorcism type work, you gotta stay in the, how should I say, in the light. And I got stung. And it's happened before. And, you know, there's a saying, you know, if your hand causes you to sin, it's better to cut it off. Well, I got nailed, and I had to go through this experience. And although it was a difficult experience, I had to go through it in order to learn. So when I'm dealing with evil, I don't give it power. My response, if a demonic spirit approaches me, is thank you for reminding me to pray. I treat it like a stop sign at an intersection. It is instructing you what you should do in order to not have an accident. So when I encounter evil, I treat it like a string around my finger. Thank you for reminding me to pray. Well, that is the last thing that they want to do. I do an example. I did this in the divinity school, and it really floored. There were about 100 people there for the presentation, and it kind of floored them. And I say to people, do this, especially with teenagers. This really gets their eyes open. If I'm talking to you, and ordinarily I wouldn't do this because it's rude, but if I'm talking to you and I point my finger at you like this, how does that make you feel? Kind of like, get out of my face. And I'll say, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you, in your mind, not out loud, to say a prayerful blessing to yourself. Any blessing. And if you don't have a blessing, I want you to think of a time in your life when you really felt good. Like if you had a baby right after your child was born. I realize it's an oxytocin poisoning, but it's a good feeling.
Yeah.
And then when they open their eyes, I do the same exact thing again, but even closer. I say, how's that make you feel? It doesn't bother me. I say, exactly. Prayer and meditation is the tool that you use to change the operational frequency of your consciousness. So this was a very low frequency thought. Your prayer raised you above this level where it didn't bother you anymore. The important thing is you don't have to give control over your consciousness to everyone around you. You have the authority over it.
Yeah.
You just have to own it. And when you do, always strive. It's just like changing channels on a radio, and I don't like the rap music down here, so I'm going to turn the dial up here to a higher frequency to a different station. Humans can do the same thing. The problem is people belong to what I call the flat consciousness society, and they think that the channel they're on is the only one that's available when there is no more. There's more channels than what there are on the satellite TVs right now. So, question.
I've got loads of questions. I've been writing them down. So first of all, thank you for sharing this in such an easy to understand way. It's been really, it helped me join the dots because I've done a lot of family constellations work where you represent a family member and you stand in a certain position, and then the people actually feel it. They feel the energy. You know, they might say they'll start rocking, or they'll have a pain somewhere, or pain in their heart, and then you can trace it. But I've never seen how somebody could do it themselves. So how would somebody be able to do that for themselves if maybe they can't remember their childhood? How would they be able to remember this is something that happened when I was 3 or 4?
Well, even in the family constellation work, they can't reach those memories. There's only one way you can reach them, yourself, and that is by owning the emotion and pulling it in, and no matter how painful it is, pull it in. But there's another magic question. When did I first experience this feeling? You know, I may be having problems in my marriage, and I go to therapy, and with psychology, we talk about what my problem is with my spouse. Well, the next session, we might talk about my previous marriage and what my problem was with the spouse. And then the next one, we might talk about when I was in college in my relationship, or the next one when I was in high school. And hopefully we get to the point where we say, my father or mother or this happened. It's like peeling an onion from the inside out. If you resolve your conflict with a person in the current situation, it generally does not heal the wound.
Yeah.
You have to go to the original perceptual programming event in order to heal the wound. So back to the one where the woman was attracted to the man who was physically abusive, by healing the wound in her childhood, the current one. Now, she could have had 15 marriages or relationships that were abusive in between. They all drop away like dominoes. You don't even have to address them. when you resolve the original event. But if you start with the current events, work backwards, you end up having to address every single one. This is why emotional bridging is such an important tool. So the question, while you're holding the emotion, when did I first experience this feeling?
Could you link it to a family member? Because I'll give you an example. The reason I was fascinated with autism is because I have Asperger's. Both my children do. My mother does, and both her siblings. And is that now a trauma that was a birth trauma or something that we've all inherited, or did we all get it from our own experiences?
Good, very good question. Very good question. First of all, there's never any blame. There's never any, you caused this, it's your fault. Remember the magic question. What lesson did my soul need to learn that I chose to bring these people and these experiences to me? That includes parents and the experiences in your childhood. You chose to be born to those parents in order to bring those experiences to you.
Yeah.
So generally, it is not, as long as you claim victim status and blame someone else, you will never, ever heal. You have to own it and say, why did I choose to bring this to me?
Okay. So it
Now you
wouldn't
can change it.
necessarily, yeah, but it wouldn't necessarily then be a birth trauma that I experienced or that my children experienced. It would have been a different kind of a soul lesson.
One thing I have to be very careful with, and that's why I was a little reluctant to share
Yeah, yeah. No, I
the
get it. You
trauma
can't
experience,
diagnose. Yeah.
because the very last thing that I want to do is impose guilt on anyone, because there is no guilt. And I never ever want mothers to think it's my fault that my child is this way. No, I don't care what happened. It's not your fault. Whatever happened is what was supposed to happen and unfold, no matter how traumatic. Because the bottom line is, even death is just another learning experience for the soul to grow.
Yeah.
It's not the end, by far not the end. So what happens is, souls tend to incarnate in groups. And as a result, that group tends to be a family unit. Many times the great grandparents become the grandchildren, and so forth. You know, I had an interesting situation where a doctor came to me, and she was in her mid-60s. She said, I don't know what's going on. She said, I have such severe anxiety, haven't been able to work. She said, can you help me with my anxiety? I said, close your eyes and think of your anxiety. I walked back and I said, you're the oldest born. Your mother was a career professional. When she became pregnant with you, she had severe anxiety. How am I going to manage my career and being a mother? And I said, you in her womb picked up on that anxiety, and it set your pattern in your soul. I walked toward her and I said, when you were 26 years old, you experienced this anxiety. She said, that was my third year of residency, in medical school residency. He said, and that's when I had my first child, my daughter. I said, and you went through the same, how am I going to manage my career of being a doctor and being a good mother?
Yeah.
She says, I know why I have this anxiety. She said, my daughter lives out of the country, and that daughter, the firstborn, and she just came to visit me 2 weeks ago, and she's been here since. And she is pregnant with her first child. 4 generations.
Yeah.
Of a pattern passing, an intergenerational, I'm not even going to call it a trauma. It's just a natural consciousness pattern. Your personality is totally a function of the flow of your consciousness within this dynamic soul. Not just in the masculine and feminine, but the height of what your issues are, or the frequency. Are they security issues? Are they identity issues? Are they a fear of love? Are they, I went to a Benedictine monastery and spent some time there. And at the end, I had a discussion with the abbot in charge of the monastery. And it was funny because I went there to determine, is it time for me to start doing some workshops and sharing what I know? And this monastery, it's Christ in the Desert Monastery. It's in northern New Mexico. It's 14 or 15 miles from the nearest paved road, high desert country, very, very remote. And I thought, no cell phones, no electricity. I thought, this is where I need to be, because when you go there, it's like stepping into a spiritual elevator. When you have 50 or 60 monks in one place praying all the time, when you step into it, it's like whoosh, and it just lifts you right up. And I said to the abbot, I said, boy, I wouldn't want your job. He said, why? I said, because you have to sort out all the people who want to come here because they're running from something versus all the people that come here because they're looking for something. And he started laughing and he said, you're right. And I said, I've noticed that about a third of your monks, their heart's open and they radiate love. The back door to their heart is closed. I said, these people think they need to earn God's love. So they close the back door of their heart thinking, I'm not worthy of it. But in reality, it's unconditional. It is there freely for everyone, no matter what you have done or you've left undone. But because they have this mentality of, I have to earn this love, so they play this game with themselves and they keep a shield and close the back door of their heart until they reach the breaking point and they say, I give up. And it's there.
Yeah.
So, and I just ran into that with a woman, a professional woman who makes a living as a psychic. And I noticed the same pattern. Radiates love. I could feel it in a phone conversation. I also felt the back door to her heart was closed. It's because human love is conditional and controlling, where divine love is unconditional and freeing.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, you can feel it right now in the center of your chest.
Mm-hmm.
That is divine love. Expand it within yourself. It's yours. It's not me. I have nothing to do with it. I'm merely perceiving what you're experiencing.
Okay, another question. So if somebody wanted to learn to do what you're doing, how would they be able to do it? Or is that something they would need to come and do a workshop with you?
I do the workshops for one reason: to help people to understand how their own journey unfolds, to give them a roadmap. So we are in special times right now because of the turmoil that we're coming into. It's interesting. I have goosebumps all over my arms and the back of my neck as I'm saying this to you. We are in special times where the higher consciousness has come to our level. We'll see it as it's light. When I see the Holy Spirit, what people call the Holy Spirit, it's like a liquid swirling light. But there's a false process too. In a false process, it works very similar to hypnosis. Most people are going to follow the false process first and become disillusioned. The difference between the false process is that you are surrendering your will externally to someone else or another human being, where the real process will only be done by surrendering within to a higher level of your own soul. Once you reach that higher level of your own soul, you realize, I'm one with everybody else. We're all consciousness. We all exist in the same space, which is a pain in the ass because you feel everyone else's physical and emotional pain when you're around them. So there's a real learning experience. But the most important thing is we are in a time right now where there is so much help is available to souls that a young soul can catch up to and surpass an old soul in one lifetime. You know, in Paramahansa Yogananda, and he was talking about Swami Ramakrishna, who Swami Ramakrishna was born in the 1830s in India. And he first became enlightened and awakened in the Hindu tradition, became a yogi. He abandoned that and became a Sufi, a Muslim, and started practicing that and became abandoned and became enlightened in the Sufi tradition. He then abandoned that and started reading the Bible and attended Christian services and taking communion and prayer and became enlightened in the Christian tradition. So Paramahansa Yogananda in the autobiography of a yogi is speaking about him, and when he's talking about, here comes a man whose soul is as a lake. He's followed by a man whose soul is as an ocean. Well, one of the reasons why a redwood is so big is there's so many growth rings from so many years, where a sapling only has maybe one or two growth rings. Each of those growth rings, back to my earlier example, are lifetime experiences where the soul is growing. But again, the key is not necessarily to grow outward, it's to grow upward. A simple demonstration that I do is I have people, I'm going to tilt this down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. I have people take a hold of the energy that flows in right here under their left arm, through their chest, and out the other side. And they take a hold of it, and I say, now close your eyes, and while you're feeling that energy in your hand, spin it from a horizontal axis to a vertical axis. And then do the same thing the opposite direction. Try it. What you'll find is, this came to me, I was doing a 10-day Vipassana meditation.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden it's like, ooh, wow, I got nailed. I knew it was, and it was my ego that was getting nailed. Day 3 of a long meditation is always the ego battle. And this was my ego battle. But what happens is, because your arms are connected above your ego, you can sit there and in prayer and bring the divine in, and it flows out through your arms. You don't flow it down into your body and the rest of you. So all this is flowing out of my arms. I just reach over with my right hand, I take a hold of the pain, and I pull it out and throw it. It's like, and I can experience the bliss again. After about 30 seconds, it's back again. Second time, I take a hold of it and I pull it out and I get rid of it. I'm experiencing the bliss again. Third time, I mean, it felt like somebody driving a wooden stake through my heart. Like, okay, God, what's my lesson? And I'm sitting there in meditation, and all of a sudden I have a vision. And in this vision, I'm an LCD projector, and I'm projecting out onto a homemade movie screen. And on this movie screen are all my identities. Lee, the CPA, the husband, the parent, all my identities are on that screen. And as a result of that, I can't see behind the screen. So I think, well, I'm just going to unhook the screen and lower it down into the beam where it's all rolled up. Now I can see beyond my ego identities because I've just rolled them up. But that beam is still blocking my vision. So I thought, I know how to put a home movie screen away. You walk around behind it and you flip the catch release And now you spin the beam from a horizontal to a vertical in alignment with the stand. I got it, God. Thank you. This is not about smashing my ego into dust and destroying it and saying I can bear this pain. It's not about crushing my will. It's about realigning my horizontal earthly will with a vertical divine will. And I just took a hold and I did this exercise, and you can actually feel it on the top of your head as you do it, because it's a divine alignment. And it's a good thing to do if you're having an argument with someone or your spouse, because it changes your perception of the situation immediately. So my teachers have always been on the other side. I've never had a teacher in a physical body. And I am eternally grateful that they've had the patience to put up with me, because many times I've been a slow learner. And I joke, I've learned by the school of hard knocks, and the class colors are black and blue. But hopefully by sharing the difficult experiences I've been through, other people can understand the concepts and do it a lot faster than me. So
Hopefully.
I am not looking for a following. I do not want to, how should I say, start a group. This is about giving people knowledge that they can take wherever they go and use it in any way they so desire, as long as they do not misuse it. Because this is the reason why I had to wait so long, is this knowledge in the hands of people without a pure motive can be very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
well,
question.
I think people that are drawn to this won't have those motives, as a general rule. So, just going back, you say when women are pregnant, you can feel the love coming from them. Is morning sickness related to the person feeling another person's energy coming into their body, and they're trying to they're fighting with it almost?
Well, absolutely. Now, first of all, biochemistry in the body is real. Hormones, endocrine system, those are all real. But the question is, what controls those? I use an example and I say, imagine I'm with my buddy and we're sitting at a bar and we're having a drink, and all of a sudden a beautiful blonde comes in and sits on the other side of the bar and starts flirting with my buddy. And they're laughing and smiling back and forth, and he buys her a drink. And pretty soon I'm noticing as he's getting all aroused and he's getting ready to go up and introduce himself and say hello, and I lean over and I say, hey, Joe, I hate to tell you this, but she has an Adam's apple.
Oh.
What happens to his hormones immediately as a result of that consciousness perceptual change?
Yeah.
Perception and consciousness drives the biochemistry. So I am not discounting biochemistry in any way, but the number one epigenetic influencing factor is consciousness. Because your consciousness is what unfolds your physical body. I had a hard time with genetics and, understanding genetics and genetic science, and at the same time saying, wait a minute, I know that consciousness has more of an influence than this. So then I started looking at how souls merge and how soul and genetics goes together. So in that example, first of all, generally it's a vagus nerve response. A lot of times a person will come to me and they'll saying, I have severe lumbar back pain, lower back pain. And I'll walk out and I'll say, oh, here's your security issue in your childhood that's anchored in your lower back. You're going to have your lower back pain. And then I'll say, oh, your defense mechanisms have compressed your erector spinae muscles along your spine, and the end result is that they have compressed your spine and not just put a tourniquet hold and block your afferent sensory neurons, but also your efferent neurons, and you are having digestive problems as well. I said 95% of the body's 5-HTP or serotonin is produced in the endochromatin-like cells in the lining of the stomach and the gut. I said, you also have depression. I said, and if the doctor gives you Prozac, it's not going to work, because Prozac is a reuptake, an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which what it does is it causes the presynaptic neuron, it blocks it from recycling the serotonin and hopefully leaves more in the synaptic cleft, which blocks the emotional neurotransmission. Well, the end result is if you have an overall deficiency of serotonin or 5-HTP in your body, which 5-HTP being the precursor for serotonin, a reuptake inhibitor is still not going to cause there to be enough serotonin, so therefore you can take all the Prozac in the world and it doesn't work. Yeah. So that person would go to the doctor and they get a painkiller for their back, they get a Prilosec or something for their stomach, and they give them a SSRI for the depression. Now you go back and you remove the childhood trauma relating to the security issue. It can be as simple as parents having a fight in front of the child. I mean, that is a trauma to a young child. Yeah. I've worked with 28 cases with MS. Every single one of them, without exception, had a trauma involving their father figure right around age 5. Notice I said father figure and not father, because I was doing a presentation and I said they had a trauma involving their father around age 5, and a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, I have MS and I don't have a trauma involving my father at age 5. I said, well, let's check. Stand there a second. I walk back, walk in, touching the memories, boom. I said, the memory's there. I said, but wait a minute. I can't tell gender when I touch a memory. I can only tell dominant, masculine, or feminine. So if your mother wore the pants, she would be your father figure and the trauma would be with her. I said, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. So one of the major problems is, let's say parents get divorced and a child doesn't blame either of their parents. Who do they blame? Themselves. Now, if I'm carrying guilt, what do I feel I deserve to get rid of that guilt? Punishment. So children start acting out because carrying guilt creates an emotional subconscious reversal of the reward punishment system, where the child is positively stimulated by criticism, negatively stimulated by praise. They actually feel better being punished because they feel they deserved it. When this happens at an emotional subconscious level and the child doesn't act out and create a punishing environment, they end up doing it subconsciously through their immune system depression. And this is what causes a lot of illness, is an emotional subconscious reversal. I do a simple arm test sometimes with people. I haven't done this in many years, but I'll have a person hold their arm out like this, and I'll push down on it, and I'll say, think of a positive thought. And they're weak. And I'll say, now think of a negative thought. And they're strong. Wow. Boom. An emotional subconscious reversal of the reward punishment system. Wow. People carry it from early years through their entire life, and they wonder, why do I self-sabotage myself all the time? That's why. But getting back to our example with the mother who is having morning sickness, you notice there's generally more morning sickness. There's a saying, oh, it's a boy.
Yeah.
That means that the boy, number one, is carrying a consciousness with a different dominant focus, which this is why children are androgynous up until about the age of 5. But it's also why bonding between mother and child is critically important for fetal development. If a mother cannot bond to the child in the womb, it actually creates complications in fetal development. But what happens is having a consciousness that is different right into the vagus nerve, it will bring up any unresolved issues with men or male, it'll bring it up in you. The vagus nerve is, there's 2 of them, longest nerves in the body. And first of all, if you ever get that punch in the gut feeling, stop and say, what's going on? What am I not seeing? That punch in the gut feeling has saved my ass many times throughout my life, because my feminine intuition will pick up on something that my logic does not. That doesn't mean I always follow it, because it can be my own unresolved garbage that's triggering it, but it means pay attention.
Yeah.
Things are not as you are logically perceiving them. So trust your feminine intuition, which is that gut feeling. But for people that have an overreactive vagus nerve, the vagus nerve starts in the lower abdomen, and it affects the diaphragm. It affects digestion, but affects the diaphragm, which affects breathing. It affects the heart. It's in the tension around the vocals. And the very last branch of the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, nervates the auricular, or the outer layer of the ear. So just like taking an aspirin sometimes will get rid of pain, taking a hold of your ears and doing this will get rid of the stomach ache or the diaphragm tension or anything that is triggered downstream in the vagus nerve. But again, it's temporary. It merely blocks the transmission through the 10th cranial nerve. It doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
So getting back to the original question, many potential factors, of which one of the biggest is the hormonal changes in the mother.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not going to keep you too long. Maybe we can do this again.
I have no idea where we're at.
It's been about 2 hours, I think, maybe even longer. But no, I'm just loving this conversation. I'm learning so much. I wanted to just ask you one more thing. Okay, so I do a lot of healing work as well, and I work with the subconscious, and that's pretty much what we do. With NLPs, going back to the original trauma, and then when you have closure on that item or whatever that trauma is that happened, then you can learn the lesson and let go of the emotion. So is that what it really is about? Is it about getting closure? Do people need closure, or is it more, or is closure the forgiveness?
You just said it in your very last words right there. Forgiveness gives closure.
Okay.
Forgiveness is detachment, and detachment is closure.
Yeah. Because I used to think that forgiveness was a result and not a thing you just say. Because there's so many people that find it very hard to just forgive somebody, because they say, if I forgive them, who's to say they're not going to keep doing it again? I'm going to keep getting hurt, then every day I forgive them.
Good question, and I have a comment relating to that. First of all, remember how I talked earlier about own it.
Yeah.
And what I say to people is own your emotion and then go up in prayer because it can't exist at a higher level of consciousness and it's dissolved and you've healed yourself. But many times the emotional trauma is so great, there's no way you can hold on to it. It's just painful. Whenever the trauma is too great to hold on to, let go of it, go up in prayer and raise yourself as high as you can, and then ask for help to come down. And higher consciousness will come down and help you to resolve it. And many times it's instantaneous and it's like, wow, what just happened? Because it's as real can be. Now, that being said, when I'm working with people, I always want them to do their own work. I don't want to fix them.
Yeah.
Because if I fix them and they haven't learned the tools, they're just going to be back in a couple of days or weeks or months and say, fix me again, fix me again. So I want people to learn and do their own work. So when forgiveness is too big of a bite to swallow, I break it into 3 pieces. So, for example, the woman who was forgiving her father for beating her mother when she was young, it was too big of a bite to swallow. So I said, first question is gain understanding. What were your grandparents like? What was your father's environment that he grew up in? Why was your father angry? Why was your father this way? Let's understand your father. So the first bite is gain understanding. The second bite is you understand that your father was experiencing a lot of pain as a result of what he had been through and his suffering and all of these experiences. So can you have compassion for your father and the pain that he was feeling as a result of being the way he was, which you gained in your understanding, which is bite 1. So bite 1 is gain understanding. Bite 2 is have compassion, and then bite 3 is forgiveness. Because now that you have compassion for the person, it's much easier. So whenever forgiveness is too big of a bite to swallow, break it into 3 bites. Much easier to process that way.
Yeah, no, I like that. Because it is too traumatic for some of them. You know, they're so deeply wounded by the event that they just can't allow themselves to get there. I mean, I've got a client at the moment she's almost suicidal and she's really at the point of just giving up, but you can't really even speak to her because her brain is fried. She's so confused. She can't keep her focus for longer than 10 minutes.
Well, another trick when you run into that, especially when people have amnesia relating to their childhood experiences.
Yeah.
I might ask a person about their childhood and they don't remember.
Yeah.
Because of the work that I'll do, I'll know about what age the trauma happened. And I will just think of something like, let's say the person was 5 years old. I know it involved father. I'll just ask a simple question. If you were in kindergarten and you were coming home from school and you got sidetracked and you came home late and your father was standing on the porch waiting for you, what would he say? Anytime a person is in a dependency because they have an unresolved conflict with someone, addiction is caused by someone else holding your power. When I'm around anyone with an addiction, my neck gets stiff. It's like a steel slave collar around my neck.
Wow.
If I'm around someone who's a drug addict, it goes all the way up to my ears from my shoulder blades to varying degrees. If it has a downward pressure, I know that it's a controlling work environment that the person is in. So what happens is, back to the example in working with this person, the soul is so dynamic that there is no cookie cutter approach. that you say, oh, I've done this before, I know what the cause is. Whenever you think that, you're going to be surprised. Because that's why I don't want to know anything before I work with someone, because I don't want to create a projection on my part.
Yeah.
I want to know. You will also, the more you become a blank slate and resolve your own issues, the more you feel other people's projections on you. And you might say, why am I feeling this? This is not who I am. Why am I, why am I feeling anger? Or why am I feeling the need to cheat on this relationship? And when you address the issue, the response is sometimes, every man I've ever been in a relationship with has cheated on me.
Yeah.
I have found in men who cheat on relationships, generally there was a younger sibling born before they went through the terrible twos and they couldn't trust the mother's love.
Wow.
So later on in life, whenever they get into a relationship, they fear that the same thing is going to happen again and they're going to get hurt and feel abandoned and rejected. And they have no idea where it came from. But because I'm reading their soul, it pops up right away. I wish everybody could do it. Number one, nobody could lie, because a lie creates a dark spot in a person's soul. And not only that, they would realize that if I tell a lie, that's creating anchor or ballast in my soul that is stopping me from reaching the higher levels.
Yeah.
So it's a fun process. I bet that this conversation was not what you were expecting when you asked me to talk about my near-death experience.
Not at all. Which was way better, shall I say.
So I have to apologize. My mind did a couple left turns, and I think I answered your question, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, you did. No, thank you very much. All right, so where can people get hold of you if they want to find out more, if they want to find out about your workshops?
Well, like I said, I am just starting.
Uh-huh.
I don't have a website, but I have it in process, hopefully get set up very, very soon, which is thescienceofthesoul.com. My name is Lee, middle initial S like Stephen, last name Lawrence. And if you add at gmail.com, that's my email address.
Okay.
I also have a Facebook page, and I post a lot of, I call them my 3 a.m. ramblings. When I wake up every morning at 3 a.m., and a lot of times in meditation, things will come to me. I'll sit down and I'll type them up. Well, I type them up and put them on his Facebook pages. So a lot of people have said, Lee, why don't you take your Facebook page, 3 a.m. ramblings, and turn them into a book? When you're doing this, remember what I said about a spiritual ego, and you have to be it would be very easy for me, because of these abilities, to think I'm somebody special and create a spiritual ego around it and say, I'm on a mission from God and I need to do this and that. That's not how it works. You have to stay humble. You have to stay empty. And then you are guided to wherever you are to be when you are supposed to be there. And that's why it wasn't time for many years.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm just now doing the website. I have to apologize at leeslawrence@gmail.com. I get so many emails that I can't possibly answer them all as much as I try. So I am not offended if somebody says, I sent you an email already and you didn't respond. or send me a message through Facebook. I don't mind at all. I apologize ahead of time for not being perfect.
Well, I'll put all your links below as well, and they can contact you however they like.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I don't have any videos like this because while I've done some in the past, I've never kept them, never recorded them. Either by a link to yours or to get a copy of this video, I would love to use it in the website that I am just now building and developing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
You're free to use it however you like.
and did I understand that you possibly might be in a different country soon for a while?
I'm moving to the Netherlands in June.
What part?
South Holland. South Holland.
Okay.
Leiden. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful area. Beautiful
Yeah.
area. Been there many times. And I've always had a preference over to Brussels, but that whole area has a special place in my heart. I have friends from there. I think it's a wise move. I think in light of what is happening, it will be a much more enriching environment for you in many ways. So,
that's good confirmation.
Thank you. Thank you for contacting me, and it has been an absolute pleasure doing this.
Yeah, no, likewise.
My apologies for the ramblings.
You know, I don't see it as rambling when I'm fascinated, and I'm sure everybody else will be too.
I welcome feedback.
Yeah.
Positive and negative, especially the negative. I really welcome it because it's how I learn. At the same time, my apologies that there just are not enough hours in the days to work with everyone. And when a person has an illness such as cancer and they're terminal and they're facing death, a lot of times they'll want to, Lee, you're my last hope, fix me. That's not the way it's supposed to work. This is about using your illness as part of your soul healing and your soul growth and going back and asking the question, why am I experiencing this? Not to blame yourself, but to say, why am I experiencing this? And it's miracles are real. Miracles are merely science that we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
They're real. But there's a whole paradigm. For example, the whole paradigm of me perceiving consciousness as physical, it just opened up. Instead of, needless to say, when I got my degree in psychology, I couldn't say anything because, I'd look at a mental illness and say, oh, well, there's what the person's issue is. I'd see it in their soul. You're going to laugh at this. My wife is a psychiatrist. And if someone would have told me that I would be married to a shrink, I would have told them that they're crazy. I joke she never has to divorce me. She can just have me committed. But anyway, my great thanks to you. Please stay in touch.
Yes, I will do. Thank you. All
Thank
right.
you. I'll be in touch. Thank you. Take care.
Lee, thank you. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.